The rain had been falling since dawn, steady and patient, as if the sky itself was waiting for something to change. Arv stood by the narrow window of his childhood home, watching the familiar street blur under the gray veil of water. The scent of wet earth drifted in through the cracks of the old wooden frame, carrying with it memories he had never truly left behind. No matter how far he traveled, this town always pulled him back, quiet, persistent, undeniable. At 32, Arv had learned many things about the world. He had learned how ambition could sharpen a man, how success could make him admired yet lonely, and how time had a strange way of circling back to unfinished chapters. What he had not learned, despite all his accomplishments, was how to forget. Behind him, his mother's voice floated softly from the kitchen. "You're awfully quiet today." He smiled faintly. "Just thinking." She didn't press further. Mothers often knew when silence was heavier than words. Arv hadn't returned home for nostalgia or comfort. He had returned because of a letter. It lay folded in his pocket, edges worn from being read too many times. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, slightly slanted, thoughtful. He hadn't seen that handwriting in over a decade, yet his heart had recognized it instantly. Mira. Her name alone had the power to pull him back into a version of himself he rarely allowed to surface. Back to a time when love had been simple, promises had been innocent, and loyalty had meant standing beside someone even when the future was uncertain. They had grown up on the same street, their lives woven together long before either understood what that meant. Mira's laughter had been the soundtrack of his youth, clear, fearless, warm. She had always believed in him, even when he doubted himself most. But belief, Arv had learned, was not always enough to keep two people together. Mira adjusted the shawl around her shoulders as she stepped onto the veranda of her house. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, and the sky had begun to lighten, though the clouds still lingered. From where she stood, she could see the familiar road, the same road she had walked 1,000 times, sometimes with hope, sometimes with heartbreak. She had not expected Arv to return. Not now. Not after all these years. Yet when news of his arrival spread through the town, it had reached her like a sudden gust of wind, unwelcome, unsettling, impossible to ignore. She had told herself she was prepared. She had told herself that the past no longer had a hold on her. But the letter she had written betrayed her. It wasn't meant to reopen old wounds. It was meant to close them. Mira had lived a life shaped by responsibility. While Arv had chased dreams beyond the town's borders, she had stayed, caring for her ailing father, teaching at the local school, becoming someone others relied on. Loyalty, for her, had never been a choice. It had been a way of life. And love had become something quieter, less demanding, less painful, or so she believed. They met again by accident or fate, depending on who one asked. Arv was walking past the old banyan tree near the school when he saw her. She was standing with a group of children, her expression patient, her voice calm as she explained something with gentle authority. For a moment, he forgot how to breathe. She had changed. There was a grace about her now, a strength shaped by years of standing alone. Yet her eyes, those expressive, honest eyes, were exactly the same. Mira felt his presence before she saw him. When she turned, the world seemed to narrow, the sounds around them fading into insignificance. Their gazes met, and in that instant, the years between them collapsed. Neither spoke. Words, they both realized, were dangerous. Finally, Mira broke the silence. "You're back." "Yes," Arv said softly. "I am." There was so much he wanted to say, apologies, explanations, confessions, but none of it seemed right. Loyalty had once bound them together. Ambition had torn them apart. "Why now?" she asked, not accusing, just curious. He hesitated. "Because some things shouldn't be left unfinished." Mira looked away, her fingers tightening around the book she held. Some things end for a reason. Their conversation was interrupted by the laughter of children, by life continuing as it always did. Yet something had shifted. A door long closed had creaked open. That evening, as the rain finally stopped and the sky cleared, both Arav and Mira lay awake in separate houses, staring into the darkness. Love had returned, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, with questions instead of answers. And loyalty, once tested by distance and time, was about to be tested again, this time by choice. Because lifelong partnership is not born from perfect beginnings, but from the courage to face what was once left behind. Morning arrived slowly, as if the town itself hesitated to wake. The rain-washed streets glistened under pale sunlight, and the air carried a fragile calm, one that felt temporary, like a pause before something inevitable. Arav hadn't slept. He sat at the small desk in his old room, fingers loosely wrapped around a cup of cold tea, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Seeing Mira again had stirred something he had spent years burying beneath ambition, distance, and carefully constructed indifference. He had loved her once with a kind of devotion that frightened him. And perhaps that fear was where everything had gone wrong. Back then, the town had felt too small for his dreams. He wanted cities that never slept, opportunities that demanded sacrifice, a future that required him to choose ambition over comfort. Mira, meanwhile, had been rooted by duty, by family, by a loyalty that ran deeper than desire. Neither had been wrong, but neither had been brave enough to bridge the distance between them. Mira's day unfolded as it always did, morning classes, gentle reprimands, encouraging smiles. Yet something was different. Her thoughts wandered, slipping back to a familiar voice, a familiar gaze. She told herself she was imagining it, the way her heart had raced when she saw him, the way old memories had rushed in uninvited. At lunch, her colleague Radha studied her with quiet curiosity. "You seem distracted today." Mira smiled faintly. "Just tired." Radha didn't look convinced. "Is it true?" Arav's back. The name landed heavier than Mira expected. "Yes," she said carefully. "For a while." Radha nodded, her expression softening. "Some people don't really leave, do they?" Mira didn't answer. Because if that were true, then she had never truly moved on. That evening, Arav found himself walking toward the riverbank, a place where countless conversations had once stretched into sunset. He didn't plan to meet Mira there. Yet she was already standing by the water, her dupatta fluttering lightly in the breeze. Fate, it seemed, had its own intentions. They stood side by side, separated by inches that felt like miles. "You still come here," Arav said. "So do you," Mira replied. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but heavy with meaning. "I read your letter," he began. "Every word." She nodded. "I didn't know if I should send it." "I'm glad you did." Mira turned to face him fully now. "Why?" He struggled for honesty without excuses. "Because it reminded me of who I was before I became someone else." Her eyes searched his face. "And do you like who you became?" The question caught him off guard. "I succeeded," he said finally. "But success doesn't replace loyalty. Or love." Mira's breath hitched, just slightly. "You left without asking me to come with you. I was afraid you'd say no. And you didn't think leaving without giving me a choice would hurt more?" The words weren't sharp, but they cut deeply. Arav lowered his gaze. "I thought loving you meant not holding you back." "And I thought loving you meant standing beside you," she replied quietly. They both stared at the river, watching the water flow endlessly forward, never pausing for regret. That night, memories refused to stay silent. Arav remembered Mira waiting for him after exams, the way she defended him when others doubted his dreams, the way she believed in his potential before he ever did. Her loyalty had never wavered, only his courage had. Mira, meanwhile, remembered unanswered letters, postponed phone calls, promises softened by distance. She remembered learning how to stop waiting. Years ago, she had been offered marriage by someone kind and dependable, someone who would never leave. She had said no, not because she loved Arav still, but because part of her feared loving anyone else without the same depth. Love, she had learned, was not easily replaced. Days passed, and the town adjusted to Arav's presence. Old friends reached out, familiar faces smiled in recognition. Yet the tension between Ariv and Mira grew, not uncomfortable, but unresolved. They spoke often now, about trivial things, about memories, about everything except the future. One evening, as they walked home from a community event, Mira finally asked, "How long are you staying?" "I don't know," Ariv admitted. "Longer than I planned." Her steps slowed. "And after that?" He stopped walking. "I used to believe partnership meant walking the same path. Now I think it means choosing each other, even when paths diverge." She turned to him, eyes shining with emotion she no longer tried to hide. "Loyalty isn't about grand promises, Ariv. It's about staying when staying is hard." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of asking you to trust me again." Mira looked at him for a long moment. "Trust isn't given twice easily." "I don't expect it to be." The town festival arrived with lights, music, and laughter. It felt symbolic, life celebrating continuity. As fireworks lit the sky, Ariv and Mira stood among the crowd. For a moment, instinct took over, and their hands brushed. Neither pulled away. In that touch was everything they hadn't said. Apology, forgiveness, longing, fear. Love hadn't died. It had waited. And loyalty, once broken by distance, now demanded proof, not words. A lifelong partnership, they both realized, would require something deeper than romance. It would require choosing each other again, fully, consciously, and without escape. The days grew warmer, and with them came a quiet urgency neither Ariv nor Mira could ignore. The town moved at its usual unhurried pace, but within them, something was accelerating. Conversations lingered longer. Silences grew more loaded. The past no longer felt distant. It stood between them, demanding to be acknowledged. Ariv began helping at the local library in the mornings, more out of a need to feel useful than any sense of obligation. Mira noticed, of course. She noticed everything. How he stayed behind to fix broken shelves, how he spoke gently to children who reminded him of who he once was. She also noticed how hard he tried. An effort she had learned was not meaningless. One afternoon, as they walked together beneath a canopy of neem trees, Mira finally said what had been circling her thoughts for days. "You never told me why you really left." Ariv stopped walking. "I told you about work. About opportunity." "Yes," she said. "But not about fear." He exhaled slowly. "I was afraid that if I stayed, I'd resent you. And I was afraid that if I left, you'd forget me." Her voice softened. "So, you chose the fear that hurt less for you." The truth stung, but he nodded. "Yes." They resumed walking, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet filling the space where words faltered. "Do you resent me now?" she asked. "No," he said immediately. "I resent the man I was for not trusting love enough to fight for it." That evening, Mira sat beside her father as he slept, his breathing shallow, uneven. The doctor's words echoed in her mind. Time was uncertain. Responsibility had shaped her life in ways love never could. When Ariv visited later, he saw the exhaustion she tried to hide. "You don't have to do this alone," he said gently. She smiled sadly. "I always have." "Let me help," he insisted. "And when you leave again?" she asked quietly. The question hung between them. "I don't want to be the man who leaves anymore." Wanting, she knew, was not the same as choosing. The next day, an email arrived that threatened everything. Ariv sat staring at his laptop, the words blurring together. A promotion. A role he had worked toward for years. It required relocation, another city, another climb, another life that didn't include this town. Old Ariv would have accepted, without hesitation. New Ariv felt something close to panic. That evening, he found Mira near the temple steps, her expression calm but distant. "I got an offer," he said. She nodded. "I assumed you would." He frowned. "You're not surprised?" "I've known you long enough to recognize crossroads," she replied. "It's everything I wanted," he said. "Or thought I wanted. And now? And now I don't know who I am without you in the equation." Mira looked away, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I can't ask you to stay. And I won't follow you out of obligation. I wouldn't want you to." "Then we're standing exactly where we were before," she said. Two people in love, pulled in opposite directions. That night, Mira dreamed of a life she never allowed herself to imagine, a home built on shared mornings, mutual sacrifices, laughter echoing through years instead of memories. She woke with tears in her eyes. Love demanded vulnerability. Loyalty demanded action. A lifelong partnership demanded both. Days passed without decision. The town whispered. Her father's health declined. Arif's deadline approached. One evening, Mira finally confronted him. "If you choose me," she said, "it can't be halfway." "I know. If you stay, even when ambition tempts you away." He met her gaze, unwavering. "And if I leave?" "Then we let each other go, with honesty, not hope." Arif felt the weight of the choice settle fully upon him. This wasn't about romance anymore. It was about who he wanted to become. On the morning of his decision, Arif packed his bag. Not to leave, but to give away the life he once chased. He declined the offer. And for the first time in years, he felt terrified and free. He walked to Mira's house, heart pounding. "I chose," he said simply. She searched his face, afraid to breathe. "I chose partnership over ambition. Loyalty over fear. You, if you'll still have me." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I was never waiting for you to stay," she whispered. "I was waiting for you to choose." They didn't embrace immediately. Some promises are too sacred to rush. But in that moment, something unbreakable was formed. Not just love reborn, but a shared future built on conscious devotion. Choosing each other was only the beginning. Arif learned this quickly. The town that had once welcomed him back with warmth now watched him with curiosity, some with approval, others with quiet skepticism. People noticed that he hadn't left. They noticed how often he was seen with Mira, how his ambitions seemed to have softened, redirected. Not everyone believed love was a good enough reason to change one's life. "Sacrificing a future like that?" an old acquaintance remarked one afternoon. "Hope it's worth it." Arif smiled politely, but the words lingered. Was it worth it? He asked himself that question often, not because he doubted Mira, but because he was learning how deeply society measured worth through achievement, not devotion. Mira, too, felt the pressure, but in different ways. Some praised her for settling down wisely. Others pitied her, assuming she had waited all these years out of desperation rather than strength. Few understood that her loyalty had never been passive. It had been deliberate. Her father's health worsened as summer deepened. Nights became longer, heavier. Mira slept in short stretches, waking at the slightest sound. Arif stayed as often as he could, sitting quietly, offering help without asking to be needed. One night, as Mira stepped outside for air, exhaustion finally broke her resolve. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she whispered. Arif placed a hand over hers. "You don't have to be strong with me." Her composure shattered. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of losing him, but of losing myself after." Arif said nothing. He only stayed. And in that silence, Mira understood something profound. This was partnership, not fixing, not saving, but remaining. When her father passed away, the town gathered in solemn respect. Mira moved through the rituals like someone underwater, present but detached. Arif never left her side. He didn't try to comfort her with platitudes. He let her grieve in her own language. Silence, tears, sudden laughter followed by guilt. Weeks later, as life slowly resumed its rhythm, Mira confessed something she had never said aloud. "I was afraid to love you fully before," she said, "because I thought if I lost you, I wouldn't survive it. And now," Arif asked gently, "now I know love doesn't make loss fatal. It makes it survivable. But grief has a way of reshaping people." Mira became quieter, more inward. Arif struggled with the helplessness of watching someone he loved suffer in ways he couldn't ease. Doubt crept in, not about love, but about adequacy. One evening, frustration spilled over. "You're here," Mira said softly, but part of you still feels like it's somewhere else. Arav stiffened. I gave up everything to stay. I know, she replied. And I'm grateful. But sometimes I wonder if you'll resent me for it one day. The words hurt because they echoed his own unspoken fear. I won't, he said firmly. But what if you do? She pressed. What if, years from now, you look at me and see only what you lost? Arav took a long breath. Then I'll remind myself that love isn't about having everything. It's about choosing one thing and honoring that choice. Mira's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but recognition. The real test came when Arav was offered consulting work remotely, prestigious, demanding, time-consuming. It was a compromise between ambition and presence. But compromise, Mira learned, had its own cost. Their time shrank. Conversations became practical. Fatigue replaced tenderness. One night, Mira finally said it. I don't want a partner who is only physically present. Arav felt the weight of the words. And I don't want to be a man who forgets how to show up emotionally, he replied. They made changes, real ones. Boundaries. Time without work. Intentional moments. Lifelong partnership, they discovered, required constant recalibration. Love was not a destination. It was maintenance. Months later, as autumn arrived, Arav asked Mira a question that carried no drama, no spectacle. Do you want to build a life with me? Not marry, not promise forever, but build. Mira smiled through tears. Yes. But only if we promise to choose each other even when it's uncomfortable. He nodded. Especially then. They didn't announce it loudly. They didn't rush. They moved forward slowly, deliberately, two people who understood that permanence was not guaranteed by vows alone, but by daily loyalty. They were no longer haunted by the past. They were shaped by it. Marriage did not change them overnight. There were no dramatic transformations, no sudden clarity about the future. What marriage gave Arav and Mira was something subtler and heavier. Permanence. They married quietly, under the same banyan tree that had witnessed their silences years before. No grand speeches. No exaggerated promises. Just two people standing in full awareness of each other's flaws, choosing to stay anyway. For a while, happiness was easy. Mornings were shared over simple meals. Evenings were filled with conversation, sometimes laughter, sometimes tired companionship. Love felt like a well-worn garment, comfortable, reliable, warm. But time, relentless and indifferent, kept moving. The first cracks didn't arrive with conflict. They arrived with routine. Days blended into weeks. Conversations shifted from dreams to logistics. Arav became increasingly absorbed in work again, not out of ambition this time, but responsibility. Mira took on more at school, becoming someone students leaned on heavily. They were both giving. They were also quietly drifting. One night, Mira lay awake beside Arav, listening to his breathing. She wondered when they had last spoken about something that wasn't urgent or necessary. She wondered if love was supposed to feel this quiet. Arav noticed the distance too, though he didn't know how to name it. He loved Mira fiercely. He admired her resilience, her integrity, her steadiness. Yet sometimes he missed the version of love that demanded him, that made him feel urgently needed. And then temptation appeared, not loudly, not recklessly, but gently. Her name was Nina. She worked with Arav on a long-term project. She laughed easily, listened intently, admired him openly. With her, Arav felt seen in a way that felt dangerously refreshing. Nothing happened. And that was precisely the problem. Because the absence of betrayal didn't erase the presence of desire. Mira sensed something was shifting, not infidelity, but distraction. One evening, she asked quietly, "Are you still happy?" Arav hesitated just a second too long. "Yes," he said. "I think so." "Think so." The words echoed in Mira's chest. She didn't accuse him. She didn't question him further. Instead, she turned inward, asking herself harder questions. Had she become too self-sufficient? Had loyalty turned into emotional distance? Had partnership turned into coexistence? The confrontation came months later, not explosive, but devastatingly calm. "I feel like I'm losing you," Mira said one night. Arav swallowed. "I feel like I'm losing myself." The honesty terrified them both. "I never wanted to cage you," Mira whispered. "And I never wanted to feel like I had to escape," he replied. Silence filled the room. This was the moment many couples quietly fracture. This was the crossroads no one photographs. They chose therapy not because they were broken, but because they were afraid of becoming strangers. They learned uncomfortable truths. That loyalty doesn't mean ignoring desire. It means understanding it without acting on it. That love isn't sustained by passion alone, but by curiosity. That lifelong partnership requires reinvention, not endurance. Arav admitted the temptation. Mira admitted the loneliness. Neither flinched. That more than anything saved them. They began again not from the beginning but from the middle. They scheduled time for each other with the same seriousness they once reserved for obligations. They spoke about fears instead of suppressing them. They learned to ask, not assume. Love returned, not as fire, but as heat. Steady, intentional, chosen. Years passed. Losses came. Successes came. Bodies aged. Dreams evolved. There were moments, quiet, fleeting, when either of them wondered what life might have been like with someone else. But they never wondered what life would be like without each other. That was the difference. One evening, as they sat watching the sun dip below the horizon, Arav said, "We survived the hardest part." Mira smiled softly.
"No.
We chose each other through it. And that was the truth. Because the long middle of forever isn't dramatic. It's repetitive. And it's where love proves whether it's real." Time did not slow down for Arav and Mira. It never does. Years accumulated gently at first. Laugh lines, gray strands, habits so ingrained they no longer noticed them. Then time grew louder. Knees ached. Names escaped memory. The future shortened. Yet something remarkable happened as the world narrowed. Their love expanded. They moved into a smaller house when climbing stairs became difficult. They donated books they no longer reread, clothes they no longer wore. Letting go became a skill, then a philosophy. "What if we need this someday?" Arav asked once, holding an old file from his career years. Mira smiled. "If we needed it, we would already be using it." They laughed. It was the kind of laughter that came from knowing what truly mattered. Arav retired before he planned to. Not because he was tired of working, but because Mira's hands began to tremble. At first, it was subtle. A cup dropped. A button took longer to fasten. Then came the diagnosis, delivered gently, professionally, devastatingly. A degenerative illness. No urgency. No drama. Just inevitability. Mira listened calmly. Arav felt the floor disappear beneath him. That night, Mira said what he was too afraid to voice. "You know I'll change," she said softly. "I don't want you to feel trapped." Arav took her face in his hands. "I chose you for life. Not for convenience. Not for health. For life." She cried then, not from fear, but from relief. Caregiving redefined loyalty.
It wasn't romantic.
It was repetitive.
Exhausting.
Humbling. Arav learned how to cook what she could swallow. How to read her moods when speech grew difficult. How to love without expecting recognition. Mira struggled with guilt. "I never wanted to be your responsibility," she whispered one evening. "You were never my responsibility," he replied. "You were always my partner. This is just another season." They lost friends. Some to distance. Some to death. The world grew smaller, quieter. But in that quiet, they found something extraordinary. Presence. They spoke less, but understood more. They touched often, hands resting together like punctuation marks between moments. Mira's memory began to fracture, but something deeper remained intact. She never forgot Arav. Not his name. Not his role. Not his place. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the window, Mira looked at him with sudden clarity. "Did we do it right?" she asked. Arav swallowed. "Do what?" "Life," she said. "Love." He smiled through tears. "We didn't do it perfectly. We did it honestly." She nodded. I'm glad it was you. Those words became his anchor. In her final months, Mira slept often. Arav read to her. Books they loved, letters they once wrote, even grocery lists when words were scarce. He held her hand through the nights, counting breaths not out of fear, but gratitude. When she passed, it was quiet. No struggle, just stillness. Grief did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like an absence. A chair no longer occupied. A voice no longer answering. A habit with no recipient. People worried about Arav. He lived alone now. But he never felt lonely. Because love like theirs does not disappear. It remains. In his final years, Arav volunteered at the school Mira once taught at. He told children stories, not fairy tales, but truths. That love is not constant excitement. That loyalty is not blind endurance. That lifelong partnership is a series of choices made again and again, even when no one is watching. When asked about Mira, he always said the same thing. She taught me how to stay. On his last evening, Arav sat beneath the banyan tree. The same one where it began. The same one where it matured. The same one where it endured. As the sun set, he closed his eyes. He was not afraid, because a life shared fully does not end. It completes itself. Epilogue. Love is not the absence of hardship. Loyalty is not the absence of desire. And lifelong partnership is not the absence of change. It is the choice to walk together, through beginnings, through middles, and all the way to the end, and to leave behind a love so complete that even time cannot undo it.